In last week's video, we looked at how I'm going to start to earn a living from landscape photography. But that, to be honest, is some way in the future. What I need to be doing right now is improving the standard of my own photography. And so that's what we're going to look at in this video. Ways that I'm going to improve my photography. The first thing that I'm going to do to improve my photography is to get out and practice. Since I left my job, I now have all week to dedicate to my photography. And before then, I only had the weekends, so my photography was improving at a very slow rate. But now that I have all week, I hope to accelerate that process. What I mean by practice my photography is to go out regularly regardless of the conditions. Now, when I first started photography, I learned that you're supposed to do landscape photography in the golden hour, the hour after sunrise or the hour before sunset. And if the weather forecast didn't look very good, then I just wouldn't go out. But that severely limited my opportunities to go out and practice my photography and to learn more about the skills of the craft. But what happened when I started YouTube was that every Saturday I would go out regardless, and I did see a significant improvement in my photography during that time. So that's what this process is all about. For the next year or so, I'm going to try and get out as often as I can. Before I left my job, I would find myself out on Saturday morning shooting in all sorts of conditions. I think that's where the term Saturday weather came from. And every now and then I would get a photographer come by and sort of we'd chat, and he'd give me the opinion that the conditions were rubbish and therefore he wasn't even going to bother getting his camera out. And I always used to feel that that was a missed opportunity. Now, I probably used to shoot the wrong type of shot when conditions are like that, and that's something that I need to learn. But I think regardless of the conditions, you can always find something to shoot. In my opinion, there is no such thing as bad light, only the wrong subject. Now, despite me thinking that I was coming out for a bit of a practice, we've actually had some quite nice light, as you can see behind me. And so let's see now if I actually manage to get a decent shot. We landscape photographers live and die by our preparation. You might be able to turn up to location for the first time ever and get lucky once, maybe even twice. But if you want to produce consistently good results, you've got to have a plan, man. This is Bonscale Pike overlooking Ullswater, and it's the first time I've ever been here. And I've come in the middle of the day purely as a scouting exercise. I'm not looking to get a final shot here, I'm just here to check out the lay of the land. When I come out on one of these scouting trips, I'm looking to establish three things. The first is how long it takes me to get here. The second is what is my composition once I'm actually here. And the third is where do I want the light to come from. I started my hike today from the road that leads out of Helton, and it's taken me over 2 hours to get here. It's about 4 miles, and most of it's uphill, so I was averaging about 2 miles an hour, which is pretty slow going. But I think that this is potentially a sunset shot because we are facing west, and therefore it's not how long it takes me to get here, it's how long it takes me to get back to the car. And hopefully, because it's downhill, I should be a lot quicker. I find my locations through a combination of the Ordnance Survey maps and Instagram. So what I do is I spend hours poring over the maps trying to find potential vantage points like this one. And then once I've found something, I'll hop onto Instagram and see if I can find any potential compositions. So before I even got here, I had a rough idea of the shot that I was looking for. I use an app called the Photographer's Ephemeris, and that tells me where the sun will rise and set at any point during the year. Now, as I said, we are facing due west at the moment, and that app is telling me that because we're approaching the autumn solstice, the sun is rising directly behind me and setting directly in front of me. And I actually don't want that. What I want is the sun off to the side a little bit. So that means that when the sun is rising and setting further to the north, and that means the summer. It's important to be able to visualize your shot as a landscape photographer. And although this time of year the sun perhaps isn't in quite the right place for me, if I get very high clouds due west and I get the sun setting in that direction, we could get an incredible sky. So I just need to store that away in the old memory banks and keep checking the weather forecast over the next couple of weeks. And if it looks promising, I could very well be back here sooner than I thought. The final thing for me to do before I head off back home is to just sort out my composition. So what I'll do typically is take 2 or 3 different compositions. At the minute I'm looking for both landscape and portrait orientation shots, and I'll take those. Even though the light isn't particularly good, they will act as record shots. It's something for me to refer back to when it's time for me to return. With so many photographers out there these days, one of the things that I need to do in order to stand out is to develop my own personal style. But how do you go about doing that? And what is style anyway? For me, style is a very, very difficult thing to define. But essentially it is the overall look and feel of your images generally. And I think there are 3 things that affect your own personal style, and those are what you like to shoot, how you like to compose your images, and the sort of lighting that you favour. I think the key to developing a personal style is awareness. Awareness of what you as a photographer like and what you don't like. And I also think it helps to start to think of your work as a larger body, a more cohesive set of images that work together rather than just a single image that stands alone. For me, style really defines what you believe to be true, the truth in your work. And there are 3 things that I believe make a good photograph. And the first thing is that the photograph should have a primary subject, something to act as a focal point. The second thing is that I believe that composition should be as simple as possible, and that involves eliminating as many distracting elements as possible. And the third thing is that the lighting should be subtle. The big problem that I have personally is, do the photographs taken in my specific style, or what I think makes a good photograph, are they commercially viable? Is that what people want to buy? And that's my biggest concern at the moment. For me, the biggest problem that I have is that I don't think that my personal style and what I like to shoot is commercially viable. I don't think that that's what people want to buy. So I've come towards a head today to take some photographs of some sailing boats. It's not a particularly brilliant day. I'm just really out here practicing. But what I would do here is pick out one of the boats, try to simplify the composition as much as I possibly can. And it's very grey and very overcast, and these are conditions that I tend to favour. But I don't think that it's going to produce an image that I'm going to sell in any great numbers. I have seen images taken here in misty conditions when there's been a little bit of colour in the sky. And that mist creates separation between the boats and their background, creating an even simpler composition. And I think those images possibly are commercially viable. So, as with all the photographs, it's about being in the right place at the right time. I think it's going to be very difficult for me to strike a balance between developing a personal style that is true to my beliefs and creating images that I can sell. On the one hand, I don't just want to go out and shoot brilliant sunrises, that's not what I'm all about. But on the other hand, I don't just want to be some sort of struggling artist who fails to sell his work. To date, my biggest selling image is an image that I took on the top of Loughrig Brow overlooking Windermere, and it's a fantastic image. It's got a beautiful sky, it's a great scene, a classic composition. But I don't think that it defines me as a photographer. I don't think it's a good example of my particular personal style. And so I think I'm going to have to strike a balance between shooting for me and shooting for images that I believe are commercially viable. And in the long run, only time will tell which of those approaches is the most successful. Today is very overcast and it's very still, and these are my favourite types of conditions. They might not be to everybody's taste, but for me the overcast sky creates a very soft light, and it's bright enough to create enough contrast, but yet there's still quite a muted colour palette. Now I love this sort of conditions, but whether or not these types of images sell, we're yet to find out. If there's one thing that I've learned in the last year, it's the positive impact that shooting with purpose can have on the quality of my images. What I mean when I talk about shooting with purpose is going out and taking a photograph for a purpose other than just capturing that image. Earlier in the year I decided that I wanted my website to rank higher in Google for the search term Lake District Landscape Photography. And what I needed to do was to put more content onto my website that was associated with that search term. And what I decided to do was to create a location guide for the Lake District. What I decided to do was to split the Lake District into 5 regions: the north, the south, the east, the west and the centre. And then for each region I decided to feature 6 locations, so that's 30 locations in total. With each location I needed a killer image that would showcase that location at its very best. Now I already had about half of them, about 15, so that meant that I needed to get another 15 shots. So from that point forward I started going out with the specific intention of ticking off these 15 locations. I started to shoot with a lot more purpose. The point of me going out to shoot was not just to take photographs, but to complete my location guide. The knock-on effect of this was it started to push me harder. I started to go to locations that perhaps I wouldn't normally, because they were a bit harder to get to. For example, on a Saturday morning, the last thing I would want to do after a week of work is to spend 3 hours in the car going to and from Wastwater. But because I was trying to complete my location guide, I had to get a shot of Wastwater, and so I pushed myself to go there. And when I did, I actually came away with one of my favourite images of the year so far. I was at the photography show earlier this year and I met a very well-known and well-respected landscape photographer while I was there. I'm not going to mention any names, I don't want to be a name dropper. But he said to me that one of the things that made a huge improvement in his work was when he specifically went out to take photographs that he could then sell as prints. By adding purpose to his photography, he saw a drastic improvement in the quality of his work. Now there are many different projects that we can take on as photographers to give our work purpose. And I've been looking at 2. Now this is by no means a commitment for me to actually go ahead and do this. These are just ideas at this stage. The first idea is to shoot my very first exhibition. Now I want my exhibition to have a theme, and the theme that I am considering is the impact that man has had on this landscape. And as I have said many times on this channel, this is not a natural landscape in its truest sense. This has been shaped by the actions of man, either through mining or agriculture or forestry or even tourism. My second idea for giving my photography more focus really stems from the first, and that is to try to achieve a distinction with the Royal Photographic Society. Now for many years I've thought about trying to achieve a licentiate of the Royal Photographic Society, but I think as my photography has improved, I'm not sure that that is actually the challenge that I need right now. What I need to be doing is trying to achieve a far higher standard. And therefore I'm considering going for my ARPS, my Associate of the Royal Photographic Society. And that will be based on the same theme, the impact that man has had on the landscape, the hand of man, if you like. And so I will take my 15 best images from my exhibition and create a panel that I will submit to the Royal Photographic Society. I cannot put together a body of work that is supposed to be about the impact of man on the Lake District landscape with at least including one image featuring a dry stone wall. And so that's why I find myself halfway up Arneson Crag. I was here a couple of weeks ago, and this was the location for that little Facebook video that I did that wasn't particularly successful. But as part of that video, there was this view, and a few of you called it out as a potential for a shot. And so I've come up today to set up a shot that uses this wall to lead the eye down towards Ullswater in the distance. Unfortunately, I don't think we've got the kind of light that will impress the Royal Photographic Society.